He was told he'd die before 30. He was told the number on the scale would kill him before the bottle or the streets ever got the chance. He spent his teenage years bouncing between jail cells instead of classrooms, and by the time most people are graduating college, he had already been arrested more times than he could count on both hands. So how does a man like that end up on Saturday Night Live, testifying in front of Congress, and selling out arenas packed with 15,000 people screaming his name? Stick around, because the story of Jelly Roll's transformation is not just about weight loss or fame. It's about a man who spent his whole life proving that where you start is never where you have to finish. Jason DeFord came into the world in Nashville, Tennessee in December of 1984, in a part of town called Antioch that didn't hand out many easy paths. His father ran a meat business by day and worked as a bookie on the side, always hustling to keep the lights on. His mother battled addiction and mental illness, and those struggles bled into their home in ways a child shouldn't have had to absorb. But even in the middle of that chaos, she gave her son something that would follow him for the rest of his life. A nickname. Because he was a heavier kid, she started calling him Jelly Roll, never imagining that decades later it would be printed on concert tickets and Billboard charts. She also gave him something else entirely by accident. She played country records around the house, Garth Brooks, George Strait, and her son would sit and listen, soaking in the way those songs could make a person feel something. That was the spark. Before he was even a teenager, he was writing his own songs, chasing that same feeling. When his parents split up, he was only 13, and something in him shifted. He decided it was his job to take care of his mother, and the way he chose to do that was by selling drugs on the street. He wasn't just moving product, though. He was slipping his own homemade mixtapes into the bags along with it, trying to get his music into as many hands as possible, even if the method was one he'd regret later. The trouble with the law started early and it didn't let up. His first arrest came at 14. By the time he was 16, he was facing an aggravated robbery charge so serious that the courts decided to try him as an adult, even though he hadn't finished growing yet. He was looking at the possibility of 20 years behind bars. In the end, he served just over a year and was placed on probation for more than 7, but the damage to his record was permanent. No voting, no owning a firearm, no volunteering in most organizations. A single decision made as a teenager followed him into every version of adulthood he would try to build. Over the years that came after, arrests piled up until they numbered somewhere close to 40. He was selling and using at the same time, caught in the kind of cycle that swallows people whole and rarely lets them back out. Then, in 2008, everything cracked open. He was 23 years old, sitting in a jail cell, when a correctional officer walked over and told him he had a daughter. Her name was Bailey. He wasn't there for her birth. He wasn't even free to hold her. But something about hearing that news while locked behind bars made him stop and actually look at the direction his life was heading. He didn't walk out of prison a changed man overnight. Change rarely works that fast. But he did start showing up differently. He earned his GED while he was still locked up, treating it like the first brick in a foundation he desperately needed to rebuild. When he was finally released in 2009, he didn't have money, he didn't have a home, and for years afterward he lived out of a van, chasing a music career that most people around him probably assumed was a long shot. He recorded a raw freestyle video about his life, his time selling drugs, his years in and out of jail, and uploaded it to YouTube with nothing to lose. That video found its way to a rapper named Lil White, who was starting his own label and saw something worth investing in. Not long after, Jelly Roll became part of a group called S&O, and doors that had never been opened to him before started to crack. He kept working. He teamed up with fellow Nashville rapper Haystack, and their album climbed onto Billboard's charts. He worked with Lil White again, and that project climbed even higher. Somewhere in the middle of all that rap and hustle, people around him started noticing something else. He could actually sing. He wasn't fully sure how to use that voice yet, but the seed had been planted, and eventually he partnered with Struggle Jennings, grandson of country legend Waylon Jennings, blending rap and country in a way that shouldn't have worked but absolutely did. It became successful enough to turn into an entire series of albums. Still, the real turning point didn't come from a collaboration. It came from a night in 2020, when he wrote a song called Save Me and posted it to YouTube within 48 hours of finishing it. There was no rap verse hiding behind a beat this time. It was just his voice, stripped down, singing about hopelessness in a way that felt uncomfortably honest. People didn't just listen to that song, they felt understood by it. Industry executives started calling it a country song, and just like that, an artist who had spent years being boxed into hip-hop found himself standing in front of an entirely new audience. From there, the momentum never really stopped. He made his debut on the Grand Ole Opry stage in 2021. His rock single hit #1 on rock radio. His first country single, about a boy who never fit the mold his family expected, hit #1 on country radio and helped him set a record for consecutive weeks at the top of Billboard's Emerging Artists chart. By the end of 2022, he had sold out Nashville's Bridgestone Arena, sharing the stage with some of the biggest names in both country and rap. The year after that, he walked away from the CMT Awards with 3 trophies for a single he had co-written, went on a 44-city tour, and was named New Artist of the Year at the Country Music Association Awards. A man who once couldn't legally vote because of a decision he made as a teenager was now being handed some of the biggest honors in American music. But while the world was watching him rise on stage, he was fighting a battle most fans couldn't see. For years, his weight had climbed until it reached 540 pounds at its peak. Doctors once told him the equipment in a normal clinic couldn't even measure him accurately, and he was advised to try finding a scale built for trucks or industrial equipment instead. He carried that humiliation quietly while performing night after night, refusing to let his body stop him from doing the one thing that had pulled him out of the darkest years of his life. He would later admit that food had never really been about food for him. It was comfort. It was an escape hatch from pain that had built up since he was a small child. In 2015, once his weight had already pushed past 500 pounds, he decided he had to fight back, and he managed to lose 200 pounds through sheer determination and a change in lifestyle. But life on the road, the late nights, the constant travel dragged him backward, and he gained a portion of it back. Instead of giving up, he kept getting back up, treating every setback as something to recover from rather than something to define him. By 2018, he was being publicly honest about how miserable the weight made him feel, listing out simple experiences other people took for granted that felt completely out of reach because of his size. He kept pushing through the years that followed, training his mind as much as his body, trying to eat better, trying to understand the emotional roots underneath the habit instead of just fighting the symptom. Then came 2024, and the difference became impossible to ignore. He started training for a 5-kilometer race in January of that year, even though he could barely walk a single mile without running out of breath at the start. He built it up slowly, walking, then jogging, then running 2 to 3 miles at a time several days a week. By April, he had already dropped more than 70 pounds. In May, he crossed the finish line of his very first race, and for a man who had once been told a normal scale couldn't hold his weight, that moment carried a kind of victory no trophy could match. When he showed up at the Academy of Country Music Awards that same month, fans barely recognized him. The change wasn't just visible in his body. It showed in the way he carried himself, the way he moved across a stage he once feared his size would keep him off of forever. By the following spring, his weight had dropped to 357 pounds, meaning he had shed close to 200 pounds total from where he'd started. And he wasn't finished. He set his sights on losing even more, talking openly about wanting to go skydiving with his wife one day, and even hoping to land a spot on the cover of a major fitness magazine. Through it all, he never pretended the fight was over. He talked honestly about the late nights that still tested him, about needing structure, cold plunges, discipline with water and food, and about treating his relationship with eating the same way he once had to treat his relationship with drugs and alcohol, one hard boundary at a time. None of this transformation happened without support, and a lot of that support came from his wife, Bunny Exo. The two of them met in 2015 after one of his shows in Las Vegas, and even though she was seeing someone else at the time, they stayed in touch until a friendship slowly turned into something more. A year later, he proposed to her at a concert, and that same night they got married at a courthouse, choosing to skip the traditional wedding entirely. Their relationship wasn't perfect. They broke up briefly in 2018 before finding their way back to each other during a trip to Colorado, and from that point forward their bond only grew stronger. Bunny built her own platform through a popular podcast and became deeply involved in his family life, helping him rebuild relationships with his children that had once felt fragile. Before Bunny came into the picture, Jelly Roll already had 2 kids from previous relationships. His daughter Bailey was born while he was still in prison, and he didn't meet her until her 2nd birthday. Earning a real place in her life took years of proving himself in court, starting with just a few supervised hours on Fridays and slowly building toward full custody once her mother went through her own struggles with addiction. Today, Bailey is a teenager who has followed her father into music, appearing alongside him in videos and even performing live with him. His son Noah, born around the time he married Bunny, has largely been raised by his mother, with Jelly Roll supporting from a more private distance, a dynamic he has spoken about honestly rather than hiding. His career, meanwhile, kept expanding into places nobody would have predicted for a kid who once handed out mixtapes in high school parking lots. In 2024, he testified in front of the United States Congress about the drug epidemic, drawing directly from his own history in the trade. He appeared in a documentary that opened with a reenactment of his own arrest. Eminem sampled one of his most personal songs for a track on his own album, and Jelly Roll appeared alongside him in the music video for it. He performed internationally for the first time that same year, acted in a television drama alongside Sylvester Stallone, and became the very first musical guest of a new season of Saturday Night Live. He recorded music for a blockbuster movie soundtrack, teamed up with a Christian artist on a song that would go on to win an award of its own, and continued collaborating across country, rap, rock, and gospel without ever losing the thread of his own story in the process. What makes Jelly Roll Storyland the way it does isn't just the number of records sold or awards won. It's the fact that almost none of it should have happened, statistically speaking. A kid with a criminal record by 14, an aggravated robbery charge by 16, roughly 40 arrests, and a weight that once threatened his health and his life had every reason to become a cautionary tale instead of a headline of triumph. Instead, he turned every one of those low points into fuel. He turned his prison sentence into a GED and a reason to change. He turned his addiction into a message he now carries to rehab centers and prisons himself. He turned 540 pounds into a 5-kilometer finish line, then a half-marathon goal, then a mission to be there for his family for decades to come. He turned a broken childhood into songs that strangers now play on their worst days because they finally feel like someone understands them. His story isn't finished, and he's been the first to say that himself. The weight loss is ongoing. The parenting is ongoing. The healing from a childhood defined by addiction and instability doesn't come with a finish line the way a race does. But if there's one thing Jelly Roll has proven over and over again, it's that starting over isn't a one-time event. It's a decision you have to keep making, day after day, even when the progress feels slow and the setbacks feel heavier than the victories. From a jail cell in Tennessee to arenas full of fans singing his lyrics back to him, his journey stands as proof that the worst chapter of someone's life doesn't have to be the last one. If this story moved you the way it moved us putting it together, drop a comment and let us know which part of his journey hit you the hardest. Hit that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story of someone who refused to stay down.